see all of our guests are here for our professional development. So again, it's really great to see everyone. I am going to just kick off and do some brief introductions. Ariella had sent everyone's bios for our session this morning, but really pleased Tamar, who I feel like is a Adult and Continuing Ed Council, like emeritus member, did a great job over the spring, starting out what was sort of an informal professional development series with the session with Steve Partridge, and then kind of wider, more public conversations in terms of the role that CUNY can play in the New York City recovery. She had the good idea to kind of continue that and more formally create a professional development series. And so she's working closely with Cheryl and with our team to develop some content. And so today is the first of this academic year of professional development. We thought it was a great idea to carry on with the conversation that we started with Steve in terms of the importance of labor market data really driving the conversation. And obviously, I think for all of us, labor market data has always driven so much of what we do, but particularly now with the economy, it's very, very important to kind of get a handle, not on these 5-year projections, but really get a handle on supply and demand. And so with that, tomorrow we'll be curating a conversation. We're really pleased to have Todd Oldham from Monroe Community College, who is quite famous in our circles around the use of labor market data. Our very own Colin Shellman, our Director of Institutional Research and Advancement at CUNY Central, and Jacqueline Kennedy from the CUNY Grad Center's Labor Market Information Service. And so with that, Tamar, I'll hand it over to you to have a conversation with everyone. And then what we will do afterwards, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And then we'll go into the breakout rooms where we'll have smaller group discussions on kind of what we've heard. And we have a couple of questions where we'll kind of solicit some feedback so that we're really getting a good sense of what resonated and kind of what some next steps might be out of this conversation. So with that, Tamar, I'll let you take it.
Thank you, Angie. I love that. I'm always so warms my heart that you think I'm sort of part of the family. So thank you so much for that. There's no nicer introduction. And hello to all of you who I've met before and seen on your campuses back in the day. So Angie, as usual, did a lot of my work for me. This is a session, this is kind of, I think of it as the second in the series. What we're going to talk about is using labor market research to guide decisions about college programs. And a little bit of, 2 minutes of background before we get to our terrific speakers. We all understand the need to align programs to labor market, to what's happening in the labor market. I don't need to explain that to any of you. We all remember the bad old days when we taught cosmetology just because there was some guy on the faculty or some lady on the faculty who knew cosmetology and had a curriculum, never mind whether we needed any cosmetologists. And we all know that student demand doesn't always align with what's happening in the labor market. Again, I'll sort of use my favorite whipping boy, cosmetology. A lot of students want cosmetology. They want veterinary tech. We don't need too many cosmetologists or veterinary techs most markets these days. But labor market, so I don't need to explain the need for labor market alignment, I don't think, but it's one of those things in life where the how, it's easier said than done. The how is not necessarily so simple. And, we talked last time about the first step of how. Employer engagement is a key way of how to figure out what's going on in the labor market. You talk to employers, but that's kind of the bottom up version. There's also a top down way of doing it, which is data. And I think, Todd will talk more about this as we get into it, but you need to think of it as, I think the way to think of it, you can do whatever you want, but the way to think of it is two complementary tools. You need a bottom-up tool and a top-down tool, and they go together and they work together. And so we're here to talk about the top-down way. And so I shouldn't be telling you this. This is going to come out of the session. This is just sort of the setup. We have a great speaker today, or three great speakers, who are going to bring it to life for you. One of them is going to, and I'll introduce them as we sort of get to them. Todd Oldham is, well, I might as well introduce them at the same time. I can read titles and read and think at the same time. Todd Oldham is the Vice President for Economic Development, Workforce, and Career Technical Education at Monroe College. And he's going to talk to you about kind of an amazing he doesn't call it a center, but an amazing tool, really, again, unit that he's built that provides him with really up-to-date labor market information, and that they then use at the college to drive programming. We're going to talk in detail about that. And then we have two of your CUNY colleagues who are going to talk about what happens here, and maybe more important, what could happen here. Colin Chelman is University Dean for Institutional and Policy Research at CUNY Central. And Jackie Kelly is now Director. Congratulations, Jackie. I didn't know you've been promoted. She used to be Interim Director. Now she's Director of the Labor Market Information Service that's at the Graduate Center. So I think with that, and then we'll bring you into the conversation. And that's really in some ways going to be the important part, because we're going to talk about how you get this information, how Central might build a mechanism to get this information. But then the key is going to be how you use it at the colleges and how you work with the system to use it at the colleges. So you're providing a coordinated system-wide response. And so the really important part of this conversation is going to be when we get to you. But we're also really lucky that we have some terrific speakers before we get to you. So, and I'm going to do it kind of the way I always do it, like I'm going to play talk show host. I guess I miss my calling in life. I really want to be a talk show host, but I wasn't good looking enough or something. But so Todd, we'll start with you, and you know, the bulk of the session is yours. We're going to talk to Todd for about half an hour, and then we're going to have Jackie and first Colin and Jackie kind of come in for 10-12 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you. So Todd, let's start with kind of, you know, it's always good to start with the why. What woke you up to this? Why did you do this? What made you realize you needed to do it?
You know, excuse me, the main reason was because we didn't feel we had a good understanding of where demand was. We'd hear a lot of anecdotal, obviously, from business and industry, which we'd hear from. But when you try to get to specifics about, okay, you know, why is that demand there? I mean, what do you pay? You know, what's the turnover rate? How is one demand, you know, compared to another area? There's just something that we didn't really ever get to real specifics. It was surprising to us because in companies, there would be, even industry associations, they'd be adamant that they had need, but they would admit they didn't really have a way to tell us the quantitative side. So we started to try over, and this for us, this has been very much a process over several years. Oops, sorry, in my office here. And so what we ended up doing is really just over project to project. Our process is a series of projects that evolved into where we're at today. We're trying to come up with better ways to accurately estimate need, monetize that need, like in order to, part of it is also to attract funding and to show policy, right? Why these positions are important within our institution, also external. And then ultimately to understand if we put students into these pathways, will the companies actually follow through? Will they really make what the companies promise? And are we really doing a public good, if you will, if we train in one area that says they have a lot of need versus another? And that's sort of, I guess, at a big picture, what we've been trying to do with our process.
That's super helpful. And I think the thing to take away, I mean, there are a lot of things to take away, but employers were saying need, it was really hard to pin it down. And the other really important, interesting thing that I've sort of learned the way Todd did it, and I don't know that this is the way CUNY would do it, he didn't like set out to build like, you know, the Taj Mahal. He sort of built a room here, and then he built a room there, and then he built a room there. Before he knew it, he had the Taj Mahal. And I don't know if that's, you know, maybe he did that, and maybe CUNY will want to do it a different way, but that's sort of really interesting part of his thing. Okay, so project to project, let's explain it in more detail. How did you build it? What does it do?
Well, we started out predominantly after doing some survey work and such, is realizing that we wanted to map. We wanted to know, and we started with programs we had. So, and this predominantly, I should say, is for career and technical ed. My focus at the college is predominantly on workforce and career technical ed. We can do it, and we have done it in some of the other areas, but for the most part, that's what we're talking about this morning. So we started out by understanding really, all right, what are the occupations that are graduates coming out of our programs at not just the 2-year level, but even the 1-year level, or in non-credit programs, the substantial certificates. What are they, you know, and where are they going into? And so we used exit polling, because we do exit poll our students and have for many years. We talked to industry, and we also talked with faculty. Faculty have been a very big part of our model because they know the students. And so from that process, we went through and basically grouped. We create, anywhere from 3 to maybe 10, depends on the area. What are the programs? How is that SIP to SOC, if you want to think of it technically, that's kind of what it is. But the point is the program to the occupations. And once you do that, once you start with that programming and you get agreement that for the most part, this represents, we think, what we're doing for the individual and what we're doing where people are going in industry, that then allows you to match, if you will, to all types of data. Because most of the data, either real time, if you're talking about job posting analytic tools, or certainly the traditional taxonomy of the government, the DOL, the QCW particularly, which is where you get a lot of this labor data, they all sort of are aligned to that kind of a taxonomic thinking. So once you've done that and you feel good about it, now you have something then to pull data in and to build a framework. And that's essentially what we've done. And that framework has evolved over time.
So that's really, really interesting. And again, this is like the 4th time I'm hearing this. I'm only understanding it now. So you sort of figured out that the point is the 2 languages can't talk to each other. What's in a course catalog can't talk to what's in the data because there's no common language. And what you did was translate the courses into SOC codes. That's what is that? That's the DOL code for each occupation, so that he could use the data to map back and forth to the courses. I mean, brilliant. This is the first time I'm understanding it. Sorry. So I'm not just the moderator. I'm the
So yeah, we did the program to the occupation. Yeah, not the course level, just a program. But
okay, so let's keep going. So what's the next iteration of the building the data center?
Well, so what we did is when we had done that, we actually did a report. It was about a 200-page report with tremendous amount of effort. We measured like 5 major sectors. We measured like hospitality, IT, healthcare, manufacturing, and skilled trades. And what we ended up doing, going through that process, we created a framework for analysis. It has other things in it, but it was such a task to do it. When we got done, of course, all the data is obsolescing rapidly. So what we were able to do is to secure a grant to take the framework we had designed and the value, and we had a lot of folks that were using it. This came through the RDC process in our region. And we actually were able to create a website that uses APIs. So if you're not familiar with that, it's essentially being able to source the data, either from different people that broker it, or if you want to, you could actually draw it down from the government. And that way it updates the framework as that data is released. And so what that does is it alleviated us the burden of having to do this. We called it the flip book. We didn't want to do another flip book. Everybody agreed that was a horrific experience and we didn't want to do it again. So we basically automated it. And then what we do is we supplement around what we can't automate, because you can't automate everything. And we use basically that system that we built to host data that we update ourselves, and then it publishes to this frame. And that's essentially where we're at today with the site.
Explain that a little further, because again, I think I get it, but you're getting techie on me. So you figured out 5 big areas. You do the research to figure out what's in demand today in Rochester. Then you automatically know, like, it's going to be the DOL data or whoever it's going to be is going to feed into it, New York State data, and it happens automatically now? You've like programmed so it auto-populates?
All the QC, all the publicly sourced data, that's just like our first layer in our kind of data sandwich. That's all automated at this point, because that's very cyclical. It comes out. You can get it from different sources. We choose to get it through a broker that has an API, because that makes my life so much easier. It has about a 2-quarter lag. So that's, traditional labor market data. It's not going to tell you what's happening right now in COVID in terms of the projections. So that's why we supplement around that with, different types of online job posting analytics. We look at our labor market outcomes for our student, which is another topic, but we were able to match. And I know CUNY is doing some of this, some of the leaders in this actually before SUNY ever got involved, but we actually do it directly, where we match our students and how they're doing in the labor market. And we actually layer that performance into the data set so that you can start to see benchmarks and self-sufficiency standards, right? We do a lot of indexing of performance, and not just even with our own students, but with any of this data, we visualize it. That's another component of the model. We're increasingly trying to do more and more visualization, which is not easy. Actually, we found that to be quite challenging. So it's always, it's always evolving. We're hoping to have our site completely. I want to redo our site actually with a different approach, because ours is now 4 or 5 years old. And so when we do that, hopefully we'll have a lot more visualization for the end user, right? Because they're not going to look at data tables. They want to look at the small takeaway that matters.
And so just to help me with the initials, so the sources, API, what's that stand for?
That stands for Application Programming Interface. It's just a common way that information can be transferred between websites.
And the main sources, so the main public sources, what are they? Can we do those out without acronyms?
Yeah, so we predominantly, most of the data, right? Wage, demographics, gender breakdown, age out. You could calculate turnover or estimate it anyway. Annual openings, replacement demand, location quotient, automation index. Well, that wouldn't be in there. Those can be, a lot of that can be sourced through the quarterly census and earnings and wages, QCEW. It comes down through, it's a subset, I believe, of what we'd call OES, which is Occupational Education Statistics. And those, I mean, many of the folks, if you're familiar with this, this is where everybody, if you go to your DOL and ask for this data, that's the same data. You're going to get that data set that has most of that data that you care about for your region, county, whatever you're looking at.
Okay, so I mean, you guys are not going to build these data centers, but it is sort of interesting to know how the machine works. I mean, that's not, I don't think that's how anybody envisions it, that every college will build its own. But it is sort of, so are we finished with that? Should we move to now how we're going to use it? Do you want to say any more about that?
No,
you want to show us anything? You have some nifty slides. Do you want to show us any of your nifty slides?
Sure. I can just share, and maybe just share with you what I, just one second.
And then we'll go to the non-credit and credit under one roof.
So maybe I can just share kind of I created a graphic some time ago that sort of tries to explain how we create that data compilation, data sandwich. I don't know what the technical term is.
Sandwich is good, or maybe Napoleon.
Kind of, yeah, right. That's even better, right? So I mean, essentially what I was trying to explain is, so you define this is an order of how we did it. I'm not saying this is the way you would want to do it, but I would argue it's very logical. And I think if you don't start with that first layer at the top, it makes it difficult to do the rest. But essentially, and I'll make this short, but we define the occupations that are linked to our programs, or I would say if areas that you feel you want to respond to with programming, but you don't yet have it, you define what those occupations are that you're training for. And once we have that, then you're able to then source this more traditional data, the government data we talked about. You can get that in different ways, but you get it. Then we tend to, because you have that programmed reality, and it looks something like this on our site. This is the grouping of occupations, okay, for one of our areas that we measure, which in this case, it's electrical engineering technologies, which is a big area for us. We have a lot of manufacturing where we're at. And so there isn't one occupation linked to the program. And that's how a lot of times we think of it. We've preferred to think of it as there are many entry-level points with that transferable skill set. And you have to define how broadly you want that to be. That's a choice you make. We've chosen to use this framework for now, and we may alter it in the future, and maybe make it narrower than it is now. But I think the point is that you can see that we're using several of these occupations to measure it as a group. And that allows us, we think, to make without getting really technical, to have a better sense of measuring the demand.
Look what detail you have. Like, it's amazing. Like 10th percentile wages, 50th percentile wages. I mean, you really know what's going on. Yeah. This is not like maybe they need, welders in my neighborhood. This is incredible. So let's go to back to the sandwich, because let's get to that. This is cool.
So once you've done that, then this flows quite nicely. You would go to like online job posting data. So we then we tend to be a heavy user of a tool called Burning Glass, and a couple of their tools we like a lot. We've used them for a long time. There are different organizations that will take that. If you know the job titles or the SOC, you can work in different ways depending on how you're approaching it. But the point is that these jobs that you're trying to focus on. So now you have this traditional longer term projected data. Now you can go in and see, we're doing this right now for our healthcare consortium, literally as we speak. We've pulled a big data set of healthcare occupations that we're focusing on. And then what we can do is say, well, let's take a look. That's pre-COVID, right? Because that's 2 quarters ago. Let's look at what's happened since June and see what's going on in the hiring, and the skill sets and things like this. And so then we use that data. And so,
and where are you in the color codes? What thing are we?
We're in blue. We would be in blue.
Which in blue still? Okay, purple. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe it's purple for you guys. So then once we're done with that, then we start to then look at. When you do that, you can look at things like skills. You can get below the credential. You can start looking at demand for skills individually and skill clusters, certifications, what employers are advertising if they state. So these are where you can get into some really neat types of analyses that really help bolster up the limitations of the publicly sourced data. So when you put those together and you integrate them, now you've got a lot more to work with. It's kind of a mosaic, but you can really start to understand maybe what's happening. And you could spend I won't go into this in detail because you could spend a lot of time on what you can do with that. But the next layer, which on my screen is sort of a greenish gray maybe, is the student labor market outcomes. Then what we do is on top of that data set, we actually measure our students' performance because we know what they're doing in the unemployment insurance record. And we start to then see within 5 tax years, for example, and I can show you what this looks like. This is some compilation that we created of looking at 15 years of outcomes, going back to, I think we did 2003. That's right on the slide. But what we can start to do is start to look at what's the median of the group that graduated at the 5th tax year, and then how does that relate to, all the occupations we've mapped to it, and as an estimate of performance. And what that kind of starts to look like is something like this. This is a crude, unfortunately our site, that's why it needs to be redone. Our drawings are not great, and I know a proportion of our drawings are not perfect if you look at the values, but what you're looking at here is the black line would represent that grouping we looked at when we had all those occupations. That's the 10th, 50th, and 90th percentile. And now we're looking at the first 5 years. We had a 0 year because we can see if they were working prior to graduating. We measured that. And we're looking at the median of what that group has done in 5 years.
So orange or orange, red, whatever color it is your students, and black is what the regional 50% should be, median should be. And the point is you're not doing it, you're close, but not quite there. You could be
Well, the 50th percentile, this is where you have to interpret it. The 50th percentile, you could think of it, a lot of folks will use it as a measure of the mid-career level.
Yeah, okay. So you're doing pretty well. Okay.
So we would say in 5 years of earnings, they're within 82% of the mid-career wage. And they're, by the way, we also index us against the average 4-year graduate, 4-year earner of doing a 4-year level job. And that's 87% of a 4-year average wage in our county. Okay. So when you look at our cost and what we're like, what third least expensive college within SUNY, we think this could potentially be a pretty powerful measure of the power of this pathway. Okay. And so what you can do with this is begin to build a rubric, which we've done, and start comparing one pathway to the other. And what that allows you to do then is to think, do I respond to this opportunity for the student in industry or this one? If I can only respond to 3 out of 8, which ones are they and how do I make that decision? This starts to begin have a applied economic, and there's other things we put into it that
let's wait till we get to we're going to get to how we use it in a second. Let's keep going on how we built it, and then So Colin's asking a question. What's the source of the self-sufficiency standard? I don't know if that's a question for now.
Yeah, no. So we use different ones. It sort of depends.
What is a self-sufficiency standard? Tell us mortals.
Yeah, so self-sufficiency standard typically it's a standard that looks at costs of individuals with different lifestyle profiles. So
like how much does it cost to live, basically? Right. So that kind of self-sufficiency, not data self-sufficiency.
Yeah. So we had been using the one from fiscalpolicy.org, which is getting dated now. For New York counties, all the counties have been calculated. I think it was done back in like early 2000, like the second 2010 or so. So now we're starting to use ALICE, which is what United Way has been using. Our anti-poverty group here really likes ALICE, so we've used that. Sometimes we index more than one, and people can pick the one they choose. How does it perform? It doesn't matter. It's just an index. University of Washington also has one that we're starting to use, and also MIT has one, the living wage calculator that you could reference. So there's a lot of references, and they use different methodologies, so depending on what you're trying to capture.
Let's keep going. So we're in the gray. So now we're coming to the green, to the orange.
Yeah, so once you put these together, it's important that you get, it's like in any research, you member check, you triangulate. You want to have folks that are in the field help you understand, does this make sense, or doesn't make any sense? And if it doesn't make sense, can you explain why? Because if you can't, then you might not want to use the data, or there might be a problem with how you're using it. So we do that in different ways. We use our partner advisors. So we have like a lot of community colleges, we work very closely with our industry associations. our secondary educators, which have their own advisory boards for these types of programs. We use our own advisory boards because we have active ones that meet regularly and they hire students from our programs. So that's an important source. We use our faculty. Faculty are very knowledgeable, so we want to pull from them. And then we also, we look at other literature that talks about these things and other data sources, and we try to really get to a point where we feel comfortable talking about and promoting that as a data point. And when you've done the validation, and maybe we're trying increasingly to visualize that, less data, more of the point, if you will, we believe that represents kind of a data-driven career pathway model. That's how we define it.
Fantastic.
So this is
Okay,
essentially
amazing
what we've done. So,
amazing thing. This is the Taj Mahal. I didn't know the metaphor. I was using the right metaphor. This is the Taj Mahal. Okay, so let's now talk about so that's sort of first half, how we get the information. Now let's think about how we use the information. So Todd, let's go back to face-to-face for a little bit. We'll come back to the slides if we need them. So the first thing that you did, I'll just sort of, I'll introduce the topic, is, thinking about how you were going to use this, you decided it didn't make sense to have credit and non-credit like operating like separate planets. So that was a huge step in my view. Like, forget the data information center, just to do what you did with credit and non-credit was like revolutionary act. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so before I came on board into a structure that had just been created by our previous president that wanted to have all the credit and non-credit and grants and career, all those areas sort of in one space to work and sort of, synergize with each other. And so the goal has been since we started in 2011 is to try to create integrated pathways. So if we know, and we've seen this in the data, and increasingly, we see a really focus on skills, right? Skill priority over credentials in some of the middle skilled community college career areas. And so what we're trying to do in the long run as we look at this data is to understand if we have, and I don't have a slide on today, but I imagine a continuum with 0 credits to 60 credits, which is the associate's degree. What are the points of credit accumulation or the non-credit components, which is seat time? What are the places by which these you can get a job without getting the credential? What's your outwage outcome? So we've been using a lot of the data to help inform that. So an example of this is for our HVAC. We have a 2-year degree in that. It's a big program. We have a lot of need for that in our region. And so we have a SUNY academic certificate at the roughly 30 credit mark, half of the degree. 60 credit is the associates. What we've done is use this data to determine that we could have the first semester's equivalency and have those folks rapidly trained and to be placed into a job and to get, not as much wage as the full year certificate, but they use it as a micro credential. And so we've been doing this approach in both the credit and non-credit for some time.
Let's fill that out a little bit. And that's in the little case study that we sent around. So the idea is Todd's in the dark again, not only literally, not figuratively or whatever. You start, Johnny starts in the non-credit side. He goes for half a semester. He comes out with enough. Does he come out with a certification, or what does he come out with? Anything? Just the
depends. It really depends on the pathway, and it really depends on the industry, what they want.
HVAC. Let's play HVAC. What does he?
So in HVAC, they come out with the basics, technical, mechanical, electrical skills necessary to show up on the job and to basically add value.
And they don't need to prove anything to anyone, to the employer or to you when they come back.
Not in terms of the technical skills, because the industry has validated and worked with us to agree that that's an acceptable stopping point, and they'll take students.
And then he comes back. Okay, so then he goes and he works for a while, and then he decides, well, I'd really like that degree. I could get promoted. So he comes back, and how does he switch? What does he use as his currency to switch to the credit side?
Well, he's already, in this example, he's already in credit. We haven't done that in non-credit. We could.
Oh, that first, whatever it is, 3 months is a credit module?
It's a series. It's the first semester's roughly a slightly altered first semester sequence. They aren't going to get financial aid for that. So that's where point we have to.
They aren't going to get what? What aren't they going to get?
Well, they're not, if they didn't sign up for the full degree, and they're not matriculated into the program, then this becomes an issue that we have to cover in terms of using local training fund dollars to cover that cost. But the value of that is that we preserve their financial aid, so that when your scenario, when they want to come back and go to the full degree, let's say, or do the second semester sequence and keep going on that that sequence, they would then potentially go into the program formally and they would have credit. If we offered that same scenario in non-credit, okay, which we could do, we've done that in mechatronics, because we're teaching the same curriculum for the most part. We are working with faculty that teach on both sides. We would use a credit by exam model where the faculty would administer really secure that they have the learning outcomes, and they would come over, and then we would.
And they take that exam when they come back. When Johnny comes, now we'll make it Susie. Susie comes back from the job. She's been on the job. She wants to get promoted. She wants the certificate now, and she takes an exam, and she gets into the.
Goes in to take the last half of that certificate sequence, and then they could go along that way. So it allows you to have more access, more entry points, more exit points, on ramps, off ramps. So these different terms we use to take an associate's pathway. And we think that that makes us much better prepared to serve, particularly a post-COVID or a COVID impacted economy where students really need to get a new skill set quickly, and they may not necessarily be interested in the degree in itself. And that's increasingly a big part of the market in our area. So this is a way for us to adapt our traditional programs and supplement with non-credit to create that more nimble pathway.
And so, I mean, you could do this even if you didn't house the two divisions under one roof, but it'd be harder because the point is you can have the same faculty teaching HVAC. Well, let's stick with mechatronics because that's more interesting. When mechatronics, the credit side, and then you could have them teaching that quick one semester course because they're in your same division, and it's just easier. The way I think of it, it's like instead of building a bridge from island to island, now you're bridging you're building a road on one island. It's a little easier. Is that sort of?
I think it is, though. I'll tell you, I was in a different position, a different part of the country, and I was doing this not to scale type of work, and I didn't have oversight of credit because that's typically not how it's done. This has become a unique model. I think it depends on the relationships. It depends on having a vision for it on the academic side. And also I think it depends on the faculty culture. So a lot of the faculty that teach like in mechatronics is we use a lot of adjuncts because we need people that have this very high current skill set. And our faculty don't necessarily have that industry, if they've been in a position for a long time. So we supplement around that. And so if we have an adjunct, they can teach in the non-credit or credit-based format. The value for the credit side is that if we're giving load, if you will, non-contractual load to the faculty, we're able to keep them busy enough that they can stay around and they don't disappear, which benefits both programs.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of practical value, I would say. I'm not saying it's a perfect model. It's just the model that we work with now because that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Okay, so we've got credit and non-credit. We got the data. We got credit and non-credit together. Now we're getting to the interesting part. The people in this room, or if this is a room, I don't know what we call these things anymore. People in this group might be able to use at their college. What the heck? How do we figure out what to offer and how to shape the programs and how to not give other programs and how to eliminate programs, start new programs, eliminate programs, shape programs? Like, how do we translate the data?
Well, so that's really the tricky part, or the part that's very messy, I guess, or it requires, it depends on the culture of the college, what your focus is on, your industries, what's the priority. So I wish I had some perfect rubric I could provide you for that. We're still navigating that, and it's different, right? Your president's changes over and priorities change. I think the key is what we've approached it with is with these types or some type of way of that you've measured your local market. What it allows you to then do is to begin to try to quantify the argument and to monetize that argument. And, now you're speaking the language that I found it to be much easier to try to get resources. So I don't have a perfect rubric, but what it does allow us to say is, look, at this area has a tremendous need. The region's output. So we didn't talk about IPEDS data and completion, but completion is your supply. So we do a supply demand where we look at the region for, let's say, CNA graduates, right? High demand, high turnover. We didn't respond for many years, but it's such a need right now. It's an essential worker too now. We actually created a program, and we did it because we looked at this data and we know the true story, but we also know that all the other providers we're not coming close to producing the demand that's needed. So now how do we then, as the educational ethic, how do we then produce for this workforce, but do it in a way where we feel good about it. We're not putting, exploitation of females. We're not, high turnover rate, dead end job. Well, what we did in this case is with that data, we're able to work with some long-term care providers, and they agreed, we'll hire these people before we're going to hire them, put them through your program, pay them minimum wage. And at the end of that, we're going to give them the licensure wage, and it's $1 more than they would get otherwise. And then you're going to be tasked with creating a non-credit LPM program to take these non-credit students and exclusively recruit them into your program. So you've created that structure for them. Now, for me, being kind of more on that data side, I feel like I can justify that intervention now, knowing why eyes wide open, the challenges to the individual we're training. And so that's one example, but it's also a way for me to go back to my college, which is resource shy, and really explain the details of why I need resources, or increasingly, I'll be honest with you, funders.
Sure.
You have a lot of funders in New York City and other places. I mean, when you translate what you're doing into this quantitative monetized way, you're speaking now the language of the corporate philanthropist, the bank philanthropy and all that. And I found that to be a much much stronger conversation for competitiveness than if you're just talking about, we really need to train these people, because it's not really very powerful anymore. And you can't really tell them what you're really going to do for the person and for the region. I think if you quantify these things, I can say, this is a demand now. If you give me funding, I can reduce that. I can increase that production by X%. That means this to the student. And, that means this to self-sufficiency. I mean, you start telling that story, I would argue that's a much stronger position from which to narrate than just, we're an educator and we need resources, which tends to be what competitors will do.
Right. So I'm getting the electronic hook here. We should move to, this is great. And I'm gonna ask you two quick questions, lightning round, just see if you can answer in like 2 words. What did it cost you to build this? This is one question. What did it cost you to build this? And what does it cost you to run it every year?
Yeah, those are great questions, and they're obvious questions. We didn't build it at one point, it's evolved. So if I had to estimate, it depends on how you're going to do it, but maybe 150,000 perhaps, if you to build and to maintain. If you do it the way we've done it, again, that doesn't mean that's how you would do it. You have a much bigger system. Per annum, I don't know. I would say it's maybe 2 to 3 FTE. I know, given what CUNY a little bit I know about it, that's probably the type of staff, perhaps. I mean, I don't have that kind of staff, but again, I'm not a system.
I know you have army of 100. You have you working overtime late at night at your kitchen table.
I've got a great staff. It's just, it probably would seem bigger than what you might seem from the presentation.
Yeah, no, we get it. Okay, so now let's go quickly. We're going to come back to you. Don't go away. Everybody's going to have questions for you, I hope. I have 15 minutes for presentation. I hope then we can have Q&A. Colin, let's come to you. You're the czar of data at CUNY Central. Talk to us about what you have, that could be used for the kind of thing that Todd's been talking about. And then I guess talk to me also about what you don't have. Like, what are we starting from? If we're going to build something like what Todd's got, how far are we? Do we have any kind of foundation?
Certainly. So I'll say that this conversation is going to ramp up to the release of a data exploration tool. We have that ready in the next month. And we'd be happy to give a demonstration to this group when it is ready. I see Angie clapping. This has been a number of years in development. So what we have available is essentially the student labor market outcomes data slice of the sandwich diagram that Todd showed.
Yep.
And this is based on the New York.
Todd, why don't you bring your sandwich back so just so you can sort of show people how that fits in.
Yeah, I think it's the gray slice.
Yeah, the top gray slice. Whoops. The student labor market outcomes data, got it.
Yeah, and that is based on New York State Department of Labor uninsurance employment data.
Yep. So
through that data, we get quarterly wages and industry in which people are working. As long as we have a social security number, we are able to match against Department of Labor records. And we have data going back to 1999. So this is labor market data on graduates, completers, current students, stop-outs, and transfers. So this is limited only to employment within New York State, but that's really the vast majority of these students.
Sure.
About 3% we find working in New Jersey. And I should say, I see there's a question in the chat. So if ACE completers, if we have a social security number for you, we have data for you. If we do not have a social security number, the Department of Labor has been really strict in how they do the matches. They won't let us do what they call a fuzzy match based on name, gender, address, anything like that. It is a strict merge on social security number. The other major limitation is we don't have occupation data. So it really is just wages, quarterly wages, and industry in which someone's working.
Let's wait to get, let's let Colin go, because we're going to run out of time if you interrupt too many questions. You and Hannah need to have an offline conversation.
And I'd be happy to follow up. So because we have wages for not only current students, but also completers, we know not just labor market outcomes, but we know trajectories toward those outcomes. And I'll leave it there and see if there are any questions.
Well, let's keep going on the what, I mean,
Sure.
when we talked about this earlier, you know, you also were pretty candid about, like, you don't have all these other pieces of the sandwich, you know, like what would CUNY, how big a lift would it be for CUNY to get there?
So the other layers of this sandwich, you know, I think we did a little back of the envelope estimate. There is a large upfront cost. We figure it would take about $500,000 to pull together the APIs, the data infrastructure and the data sources to build something that Todd has built. On an ongoing basis, we think an analyst could keep this running and build new reports and data visualizations. So 500,000 up front, and you could say 100 to 120 ongoing costs.
So Todd was willing to give you 2 or 3 FTEs. You're only going to take 1?
That was bare bones, bare bones.
Okay. Okay. So that's great. Okay. So I'm sorry, we are getting sort of short on time. Angie, can you clarify, or Ariella, do we have like 5 more minutes for one more presentation, or should we be cutting? I mean, I want Jackie to talk, but questions, is that included in that time, or do we have time, a little bit of time after for questions?
So we have, oh, sorry, Ariella.
Only 5 minutes. Okay, well, we better go. Okay, Jackie. Jackie, let's see if we can talk. Let's see if we can come back. Todd, can you let your, yeah, there we go. So Jackie, you run a labor market information service in CUNY, but it doesn't do this. So talk to us about it. And if you could, I hate to do this to you, but let's see if we can leave 2 minutes for questions. Let's let you and I talk for 3 minutes and then see if we could leave 2 minutes for questions. And I apologize. You're on mute.
Lose my 2 minutes that way. So I think something that might be helpful is I'll share my screen. I have 2 slides that I think could just help.
Perfect.
Move us through quickly tomorrow, and then just guide me with what you think the most important thing to.
Well, we want to, you know, I mean, again, the biggest question is sort of what do you do now? That's sort of, and then sort of relate it to like what Todd does, so that we get a sense of kind of, again, like, I mean, I'm thinking, if I'm sort of Angie, I'm thinking like, am I going to build one of these? What do I already have to work with? And that's really the question.
So at LMIS, so as Tamar mentioned, we're part of the Graduate Center, but we are sort of an independent entity. But we do a lot of work with CUNY. I think some of you were with me last week when we presented on some of that data. What Todd described, we think of more as a Venn diagram, although I really liked the Napoleon visual as well. So we use a lot of that, what we call secondary data that's publicly available that we didn't collect ourselves, that labor market data. He mentioned things like QCEW, wage data. We also use a lot of proprietary data that Todd mentioned, like Burning Glass, that helps us understand demand in the market. Those CUNY student outcomes that Colin just mentioned and that Todd mentioned for Monroe, we use that in our work as well.
Where is that? Is that pink, or is that something just not here?
That's green. Or
That's,
what
oh,
what
that's
looks to me like
green
green.
is in,
So that's,
outcomes is in green. Okay. Okay.
so the way we look at it is whether or not it's publicly available or whether it's proprietary. So for example, that labor market data that Colin and Todd mentioned, that's not something you can get on the web and see for CUNY graduates. That takes, you know, you have to make some requests for that. Same with the burning glass data that really helps us understand demand in the moment that Todd was describing as so important now because of COVID in particular. Some of the publicly available data, the big, clean government data, that's still available online, but it's just less useful right now because when something like COVID hit, it just becomes less reflective of the current reality.
And what's the primary data? What's the pink? What's the primary data?
So primary data, that is what LMIS, what we collect ourselves. And so just to tell you a little bit about what we do, we are very focused on labor market data and looking at it from a number of different angles. But for our purposes, we really like to understand the why and the how, not only the numbers themselves. So when we work with a research partner or we have a client, we often will use qualitative data or we'll do our own surveys, our own interviews, our own focus groups to really give a lot more context than just the data alone. So I'll just give you a couple examples of what that can look like here. So we do a lot of career maps, is probably what we're most famous for, that uses labor market data, both demand data that's very of the moment, and these larger data sets that are publicly available, but as Todd mentioned, a little bit slower in catching up. They have a little bit of a delay, helping people think about how do I get my foot in the door in a career in an industry, and then what does it look like in terms of progressing. So we do those for colleges and for the DOE. And Todd also mentioned this idea of what we call the Self-Sufficiency Score. We also use that quite a bit in our own work when we're doing things like career maps or providing guidance to a college, to a client. But what we use is the MIT Living Wage Calculator. I think that was an example he gave, so that we are helping our clients and they're helping their clients not guide folks into dead-end jobs that just don't pay enough to live comfortably in New York City.
Great, so this is super helpful, and I'm really, really sorry to cut you short. But let's go back to the faces. So can I just ask one question? Like, I mean, the hard question for me when I think about CUNY is, and this is really a question for maybe Angie and everyone else. I'm going to ask you a question as opposed to letting you ask us a question. You know, if you built one of these, you'd want to build it at Central, right? And then the information would come trickling down to the colleges. And so how would that work? And could we really make it work like a system? Because like if let's pretend Jackie's going to build it for us, right? Or Jackie and Colin together are going to build something, and it tells you we need 500 telemedicine techs. Well, and every college wants to start a telemedicine tech school. Like, how do people envision that working so that we're actually, once we have this understanding of the demand side, so that we're actually supplying it in a real way across all the colleges? I mean, do we have a vision for how that would work? I'd love to hear how people in the colleges maybe think about that. Like, if, you know, if the chancellor said, Angie said, there's only 500, we really only need 500 telemedicine techs. How are you guys going to work it out among yourselves? Like, who's going to train them? Any thoughts about that? Everybody be brave. Somebody be brave.
Well,
Go ahead, Hannah.
You know, I think that's part of the labor market data. I mean, you know, Todd talked about looking at what else is out there in the supply. So in addition to labor market demand, we're looking at how many other schools are doing this. If no other schools are doing it and there's a lot of demand, we'll jump in. If a bunch of other schools are doing it and there's moderate demand, then don't jump in. You know, I mean,
yeah, interesting. So you can just use this as a tool, but you don't think, like, it'll show a gap and then you'll say, you're entrepreneurial, you'll say, I can do it. And then Sunil and Kingsborough will, I mean, I'm just making this up, will also say, we can do it. And like, then what do? Like, you know, rock, paper, scissors? Like, how do we figure that out?
Well, I guess what happens currently, which doesn't mean it couldn't be better coordinated, but I think if we all have annual evaluations, if it just so happens 5 colleges start a new program at the same time, when we're doing our annual review of that program, we're looking at this stuff again and we're seeing, oh, okay, there's a whole bunch of programs. How did our students do? Maybe we dropped this. If our students are doing really well, even though there's a bunch of programs, sometimes there may be a lot of programs, but you have the best program, and there's a lot of employers that want to hire your people, and it might not be in comparison to other CUNY schools, but in comparison to other proprietary schools. You know, medical assisting, there's a million medical assisting programs out there, but ours is the best, and all our folks get hired. So, you know, it still makes sense to do it.
The tool helps you figure out, the tool helps you decide. I mean, that's, you know, because that seems to me like the hardest problem at CUNY, like the sort of the sibling rivalry, for want of a better word, on this, that everybody would want to do this. But if you think the data can tell you the answers, that would solve a lot of sibling rivalry problems around the world. The data will tell us the answer. I'm only kidding. Angie, you're sort of nodding, and I think
Yeah. So
we're
I
at
guess
moment zero.
The quick piece that I'd say, and I sort of mentioned this maybe a little bit at the outset, and I know Jane had to jump off, but Kim from Lehman is here. You know, it's not a coincidence that I think at Lehman, the academic and the continuing ed side have been getting tighter and tighter. And that EVC Cruz, when he was president there, when Provost Nwasu was with him at Fullerton, they very concretely worked to bring the adult and continuing ed professional schools together with the academic enterprise to think about the stackable credentials, to figure out how to start to weave in more of this performance data. And so I think that's partly the vision. We've got a couple of, you know, really important national demonstration projects that we're going to be participating in, creating stackable credentials out of 6 of our community colleges. And the program leads, like presidents, are going to be very active in this negotiation. So I do think, again, there's when, you know, a ton of the entrepreneurship only happens kind of at, let's say, an ACE level, and provosts aren't sort of, you know, comparing some of the performance that Hannah articulated. We then get really entrepreneurial, but really separate things that are happening. So I'm starting to feel and see a sea change through very concrete projects that are being endorsed by the Chancellor and EVC Cruz to start some of that provost and presidential coordination. It doesn't mean that we're going to lop off opportunity, but I do think it's starting to mean that we can get some level of just transparency to what everyone's doing. And then, you know, all of the deans on this call, the provost, the presidents can start to be rational to sort of say, do we all want to be in everything? Do we want to take some lanes and try to specialize? Do we all have to do cloud computing? Do we all have to do community health or telemedicine? Or should we start to have a couple of clusters? So that's a big part of this, as is that Zeta grade having kind of some level of data transparency, as is having pieces of the sandwich in terms of burning glass and the wage data. So it's not uncomplicated, but we're having this professional development.
But you're moving in that direction. Yeah.
Move in this direction.
Yeah, great. Am I out of time? I don't want to be overstay my welcome here.
I think if we want to do kind of last minute roundup, Ariella, if that's okay with Colin, with Jackie, with Todd, with Tamar, if there's a last lightning round, and then I think we should have enough time to go into our breakout rooms.
So lightning round, I mean, I think it's like, so first of all, I just want to thank Todd, Colin, and Jackie. Super helpful, super, really, you know, I think you've laid out a great vision and laid it out really nicely. My instinct for lightning round is I'm interested if there, I'm guessing we just haven't let anyone ask a single question. I'd rather have a question or two from the floor, so to speak, than me say more. Or, but does anybody want to kind of get the last question? Fantastic presentation. That's good. We like the good reviews. Thank you, Amy.
Oh, just a quick question for Todd. Todd, you had alluded to the challenge of data visualization in your part of the presentation. I was wondering if you could talk quickly about how you're trying to solve for that at MCC.
I'm gonna help him hire someone. I have a good idea for him.
We've actually we've been trying to just show the steps, again, the 3 levels that we're working with in the degree pathway, including non-credit options, and just show that with the relevant, very limited amount of data in each of those steps very graphically, so it's kind of bright. And we've been working with some artists to do that, and the goal is to put that on our site, but we just haven't got there yet. But predominantly that's how we've been thinking of it, is more of that standard stepped way of imagining it.
So this is like the 3 levels in the labor market. Like you can get a job with this much, and then you can get a better job with that much.
Sub-certificate, academic certificate,
Yeah.
degree, and then maybe a 4th one, which would be the 4-year level, the opportunity, even if you map it broadly, so the student can see the, you know, a reasonable perspective of what they could hope to achieve over the,
Yeah.
you know,
Career map. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. A
Yeah,
career map,
right.
only really informed, not just like generic career map. One more question. Okay, so you all know how to do this. You're going to go home and build one at home. Great. So Todd, again, thank you so much. Really, really super, you know, amazing thing you've built. Kudos. And Colin and Jackie, thanks for kind of bringing us up on CUNY. Angie, I think we can say thank you and thanks to everyone for listening.